It's not always easy to socially distance. This pizza restaurant in East London is following the rules as it prepares to open its doors again when lockdown eases on the 4th of July in England.
Getting ready, social distance tables.
But the Prime Minister was insistent today that the public must do better. Following scenes like this, images that have prompted fears of a second wave of COVID-19.
You saw what happened in Bournemouth yesterday. There's a bit of over-exuberance.
But were they just reacting to his words earlier this week when he said the national hibernation was finally over? If there is a second wave now, because of that language that you've used, will you take personal responsibility for that?
Well, let me be very clear about the scenes in Bournemouth. I think it's very important for people to understand that if you look at what's happening elsewhere in the world, where people have been coming out of lockdown, I'm afraid what you're also seeing is people taking too many liberties with the guidance, mingling too much, not observing social distance. The virus is still out there. To win, to beat this thing, we have to stay alert and do this in a balanced way.
Another plea for caution from the Prime Minister, but is anybody listening? Some beachgoers in Bournemouth weren't when they flocked to the coast yesterday. A major incident was declared, there were reports of fights breaking out, and last night 3 people were stabbed, but no arrests were made. In London, parties in the parks later became confrontations with the police, who responded with extra officers and dog units on standby. Scotland Yard said objects were thrown as they tried to disperse the crowds. Scenes were more sedate and sunbathers more separate on the Kent coastline today.
We just drove along the seafront and I said, if it's packed,
we're going back.
We're going back straight away.
When we see Bournemouth in the paper, you know, I don't know whether that was a shot that was sort of like, looked as though it was crowded. It did look packed, didn't it?
Did look really
you know, that was frightening, really. But you look from up there and look down here and you can see everyone who's actually keeping away.
This could be because security guards are on patrol here.
We're here purposely for the social distancing and social behaviour, so we'll just pre-warn what's going to happen, and so far it's working.
Having a good time? Yeah.
But if England's beaches do fill up again, could the government consider closing them?
We have the power to close them and to go back to a sort of partial lockdown if that were required. But we're very, very reluctant to do that. You know, people have had a tough lockdown over the last few months. It's hot weather. We understand why people would want to get out and take their family to the beach.
In a week, it's not just beaches and parks, but restaurants and pubs that will be open to a lockdown-weary public. The government is hoping for a summer of social distancing, but given the tension we've seen already, could we instead be headed for a summer of discontent?
Well, amid warnings that people's failure to maintain social distancing could lead to another wave of infections, an efficient track and trace system is one of the only tools available to help contain the spread. The Public Health Director leading the coronavirus response in Cumbria has warned that there are gaps in the way national and local systems are working together, saying crucial information still isn't being passed to those in charge at a local level. Our North of England correspondent Claire Fallon has been given exclusive access to Cumbria's tracing team.
There are some places where the sound of lockdown still exists. But mostly, it's been replaced. Every day busier than the last. In some places, it feels busier than ever. But the virus hasn't gone away. Unlocking means more freedom, and also more risk.
All you've got to do now is to stay in for 14 days.
This is not the much-hailed national test and trace system, the one we were told would be world-beating.
And who lives at your house?
In Cumbria, sexual health workers have been drafted in to track the virus by making the calls and asking the right questions.
If you do then develop symptoms, I can arrange a test for you. Be fine, the dog will be fine. And I don't think the dog will tolerate it anyway, because the swab has to go up the nose, they wouldn't like it.
I feel like we've definitely had the can-do attitude here and cracked on, yeah.
2 weeks before the government's centralised system was up and running, Cumbria's own local track and trace was already in place.
So from all the data that we're collecting locally, it's very easy to recognise trends, and I feel that the local team with public health, local authority, are able to very quickly identify where there may become an outbreak and track that down really quickly to give the right advice to people to isolate or test, and then we're hopefully heading off outbreaks.
So you're spotting an outbreak before it is an outbreak, essentially?
Yeah. If one person tests positive, it's documented, and then if you have two, well, we really do need to act fast.
And Cumbria's weather hot and humid today with plenty sunshine.
Even before the beginning of lockdown, visitors were being told to stay away from Cumbria. They were told they weren't welcome. But now as we approach a big next step in unlocking, they know more people will come, and frankly, they want the money that visitors bring. So they see the test and trace system as crucial in making sure they're prepared for it. The latest figures for England show almost a quarter of people who've tested positive for COVID-19 aren't successfully contacted or won't say who they've come into contact with. The local tracers in Cumbria are being given a relatively small number of cases to chase, but say their compliance rate is much higher.
In many ways, test and trace is about hunting down the virus and controlling it as best you can. But in many ways, it's about allowing the economy to open back up again. Would I have come out this quickly? That's a really good question. My feeling is we need to start coming out of lockdown, and we will be there with test and trace to deal with the consequences. It's one of the reasons we went early with our own system. Without a test and trace system, you shouldn't be coming out of lockdown.
But we don't just have one test and trace system, and that creates the issue of data sharing. For the Director of Public Health in Cumbria, it's caused some frustrations.
We've known ever since the national system started, we've been getting information about how many people have gone through the national system and how many people have been identified as contacts by the national system. But that's all. That doesn't tell me very much. We don't know who they are, we don't know where they are. As of today, we should be starting to get the postcode data and considerably more information about the people who are being followed up through the national system.
Will you know who they are, though?
No, not yet.
Is that a problem?
We'll find out. Personally, I would like to have access to all of that information so that we can follow things up if necessary.
Is the national test and trace system world-beating?
I'll tell you in a few months once it's settled down.
But right now?
I don't think it's world-beating quite yet. I think the strength of the local systems are proving themselves. The national systems are not quite there yet.
Not quite there yet is not how the government puts it. They say the track and trace system is effective, with the different strands working together. What is clear is that unlocking is a balance of risks.
Well, we're joined now by the epidemiologist, Professor John Edmonds, who's a member of the government's SAGE advisory group. Professor Edmonds, thanks very much for joining us this evening. We'll talk about test and trace in a moment, but we see those pictures of people absolutely packed onto the beaches. We see raves and street parties in various parts of the country. From a scientific point of view, should we be worried about all of that?
Well, I have to say, you know, it's not ideal for protection of us from this, you know, potential second wave. But I would say that probably contacts outside are much less risky than contacts inside. I think the stuff on beaches and things like that, I think it makes very good copy, you know, it makes great pictures you can show on the news. I'm much more worried about people's behaviour in their homes. You know, the vast majority of people have behaved extremely sensibly during this lockdown and the subsequent easing out of lockdown. But, you know, there's now sort of signs that people are starting to make slight changes to their behaviour, and that worries me every bit as much as seeing a few people on a beach.
I suppose if you have the government talking about coming out of hibernation, telling people to prepare for an al fresco revolution, you might expect not, as you say then, easing of lockdown, but a bit of a race to lockdown, which seems to be what we're seeing. I mean, is a second spike, in your view, at the moment, possible or inevitable?
I think the signs are already there that we may already be starting to see, the tide may already be changing. If you look at the latest ONS figures, the rate of infection in the community has been declining very rapidly over the last few weeks, and now it has stabilised at least. I mean, looking at the latest figures, the prevalence has gone up somewhat. Now, I don't want to overinterpret just one data point, but that is certainly of concern, and it matches in with sort of other pieces of information that we have, as I say, this sort of looking at people's behaviour, and it may be that, as I say, the tide may already be turning.
And is that the fault of, or a consequence of, should I say, the language used by government? It's not definitive. It seems very much to suggest it's up to individuals to do the right thing, to act responsibly, which may be okay, but if you're an individual who's one of several 100,000 sitting on a beach, you can't do a lot about it.
Well, all along it's been up to people, every individual to act responsibly, and we've got to keep doing that. I understand.
But the question's about the clarity of the message, I suppose, isn't it?
Yeah, possibly. That's not my expertise. That's not my area of expertise. But yeah, I mean, it would generally help if you give some people very clear advice and you stick to it.
So just on that point, given where we are, where you say we are, should the advice be clearer in your view? Should there be something more specific which is being said to people?
I think we need to remain cautious. It won't take very long for this virus to come back quickly. So I think that we need to stay very cautious. I think people have, to a large extent. I think people have behaved amazingly sensibly over the last 2 or 3 months. And I would hope that they continue to do so.
And clearly so much of this, we're told now, relies on the success of test and trace. We know from figures that NHS tracers are failing to get hold of around a quarter of people. That's got to be a concern, hasn't it?
Absolutely. That's our safety net. So an effective test and trace system is how we get out of lockdown. And unless that's working really well, we're in danger of a recurrence of the epidemic. And I should say as well, I think you need to be careful. There's many different ways that you can organise a test and trace system, contact tracing system, and we haven't adopted the most stringent of them. And so if we're not adopting the most stringent system in the first place, and then we're not performing very well, then that's a worry.